Call the meeting to order, please. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustee regular meeting for Thursday, February 20th, 2014. The time is about 7:02 on this, it's like a real hound of the Baskervilles night out there tonight. I couldn't see it all coming over here. So I would ask you to please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Hamilton. Here. Trustee Pollak.
Here.
Trustee Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Collins.
Here.
Trustee Foley.
Here.
Village Manager Scalera.
Here.
Also present, Village Clerk Haley. Not with us this evening, Trustee Sussman, and our village attorneys, Michael Mars and Lance Moyer.
Thank you. I ask you to please rise for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone who's here and everyone who is watching at home. If you're here with us this evening and you would like to make any comments to the board, you're welcome to do so at any time. You can do so during the period of public comment, or if you'd rather wait till a particular agenda item comes up, you're welcome to do it at that time as well. I just ask that you be recognized by the president and make your comments from the podium so that the folks at home can see and hear you. Before we move on to presentations and public comment, I just would like to just make a comment about why our attorneys are not here this evening. At our last meeting, we talked about one of our goals being to try some new meeting procedures. What we're going to try to do in months to come is to stagger the presence of our attorneys so that we will have, at one meeting, we will discuss things at which we think that we might need attorney comment, and then at the next meeting, they'll actually get a night off and we will be able to pay less in attorney's fees as well. So that's the reason they're not with us tonight. So first up are presentations and public comment. And first is a presentation by Burke Engineering, and I'll ask our village manager to please introduce the topic.
Well, the agenda topic before the board this evening stems back to a action that was taken in April of 2013, at which time Christopher Burke Engineering was hired to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the village's sewer system. The intent of the study was to gain a complete understanding of the functionality and limitations of the village's existing sewer system. And before you, at your places, we've given you hard copies of the report as well as the exhibits that Burke will be reviewing this evening. I would like to say that the study, I was very impressed with this study. It does provide a number of information for us. The most exciting part is the information that was provided to us is going to be incorporated into our GIS system. We will have a record of that information available for future individuals to access. It did identify a number of problem areas, as well as, to me, and Orion will review this later in his presentation, the fact that a majority of the village is on a combined system, and steps will be needed to be taken to move us off of that to a separate system. So I think the plan, as it will be presented, does provide a good framework for the board and the village to work off of in years to come, and I'm excited at the result of the study. So I will turn it over to Orion and his group.
Pardon?
Some people that want to make comments first, so they don't have to wait through the whole.
Actually, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Daly, correct?
And
Some of the
Tracy,
things
that you had something you also wanted to talk to us about? The suggestion is we have some residents here who have some things that they wanted to address to us before we go into the kind of this longer presentation. So Ryan, with your, Mr. Daly? Thank you, trustee.
I'm Steve Daly, live on Maplewood Road.
Maya Schultz, Lincoln Avenue.
We're here just to follow up briefly. We circulated a rather lengthy, I'm afraid, letter a few days ago regarding the community rating system that's sponsored by FEMA. And we won't go over the letter in detail because we've had a chance to, hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. But you just, you know, the way I might summarize it is a safe, sort of a safe driver program or a safe driver discount for towns along the river. The concept is simply that if you live in a well-governed town that manages the floodplain and has a disaster recovery, a disaster relief process in place, then the residents should receive a discount on their flood insurance to reflect the fact that the town is well governed and has these programs, has alerts citizens about flood dangers. In the past, Riverside has dispatched the fire department personnel to literally go door to door notifying people. Things like that should be reflected in the insurance premiums that folks pay who live in the village. And again, I just wanted to thank we want to thank Mrs. Scalera and Chief Kimura and Mr. Bailey for their efforts to pursue this and investigate this, because and we also, I just want to reiterate that there are folks in the village who are willing to show up and roll up their sleeves and help in a volunteer capacity, if that winds up being in the cards. We did learn that we understand that those kinds of citizens or volunteer groups, if they're organized and formal, can actually result in lowered premiums, because that's one indication that the village is well organized. And so we're here to just show you that there's a lot of interest among the residents. As you saw at the end of the letter, a lot of people interested in this, and we really hope that you'll look at it very seriously and pursue it.
And just to tie into that, Lincoln Avenue, we have a lot of renters on that block, and I feel like we need to incorporate the landlords in that block in the conversation. A lot of them are garden unit apartments, and we see renters who are flooded out of all of their possessions. Those people don't have flood insurance. They're not told by their landlords they need flood insurance for contents. So on our block, and it's a mix of single-family homes as well as renters, the children are devastated, families are devastated, our neighborhood falls apart. So it really is important to us. We don't ask for these events. They happen more frequently, we find, over the past 5 years. I think we have 1 or 2, if not 3 a year, where we're emptying our basement. So we now see on our flood insurance policy what discount our village has given to us, or we get by the participation in this program, and it's a big 0. So for us, it's a little bit, another punch in the gut from what we had with floods. So for us, it's really important to see some things we can do as a community. Like I said, we have a lot of renters. They don't live there from the year prior. They don't know what happens. And when they lose all their possessions, we feel it for them as well. So that's just our request for why we want this to be a more focused issue, and are willing to pull up our sleeves, because we feel the pain all the way across.
And if I may, the program that they're referring to, we have, and we are exploring a number of the criteria in order for the village to participate, which would then equate to a savings or a discount for the homeowners in that area. We do a lot of that stuff already, so it's just a matter of documenting that and having the appropriate individuals from, I believe it's FEMA, or come out to do the audit, and we are working with them to set a date to do that. So it is something that Chief Kimura, Mr. Bailey, and I take serious, and we do want to help those group of individuals, and we will do our best to expedite it and get that through for you guys.
Yeah, the last comment I want to make is flood insurance. You guys probably see in the news, it's a big thing with skyrocketing premiums. So every homeowner who has a mortgage is required to have flood insurance if you're in the floodplain. So our flood insurance is $2,500 a year. And that does not cover your basement, just covers your hot water heater and your furnace. So all their contents are not included. So this is why it's so important to us. So we know the river will never take the whole entire home. My home has been there for 100 years, yet I have to insure the whole value of my home. So any discount we get to kind of offset that rising cost is appreciated from a homeowner. I'd rather spend those dollars at local businesses than sending them to FEMA knowing they never come back to our community when we flood. So this is why we're asking that dollars could be spent here versus going somewhere else.
Well, obviously, you don't have to convince us. I mean, we're already in the process of doing everything that we can to make this happen. So we really appreciate you coming in.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to address the board before we get on to the report du jour?
I will turn it over to Orion Gailey with Christopher Burke Engineering. Orion serves as the village's engineer, but he is the senior engineer project manager for Burke.
Okay, well, as Peter said, my name's Orion Gailey. I'm joined tonight by Jeff Jolkowski and Michael Burke. We all work for Christopher Burke Engineering, and we're here to discuss the village's comprehensive sewer study that we've been working on for a number of months now. I'm just going to give some brief background, and then I'll turn it over to Jeff, who will go through the specifics of the study. But with a night like tonight, with all this rain and the crazy weather we've been having, I do hope that none of the residents here face the wrath of the flooding, but it is a good opportunity for us to begin discussing the sewer system here in the village. So, as you may be aware, a year ago, our firm was engineer. The first step I took was to sit down with staff, including Peter and Ed here, to kind of brainstorm some objectives for the village moving forward. I think a consensus that we all had was to prioritize the village sewer system so that we could better understand the intricacies and some of the shortcomings of the system and see if we can come up with some capital improvement plan to provide some projects that can start to bring that into today's standards rather than the standards that were in place when the sewers were originally constructed. So when the board gave us the go-ahead to move forward with the study, I grabbed some of our experts here that are very familiar with sewer systems and the modeling of those sewer systems. I explained to them that the objectives of the village is to be able to get a comprehensive understanding of that sewer system, be able to integrate it into the GIS system that's already withstanding in the village, as well as be able to come up with some projects that we can start relatively soon to help reduce the combined sewer overflows that are going into the Des Plaines River, help reduce the sewer backups that residents experience in their basements due to the undersizing of some of the pipes, as well as move forward with the green initiative that the village has by separating out some of the combined sewers and putting in some separate storm sewer through here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff, who will go through our detailed study here that we've put together for you tonight. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone tonight. Who wants to talk about some drainage? Like everyone mentioned here, our project was to develop this comprehensive model of the village's sewer system. And I'll first take a second to, I guess, congratulate you on thinking proactively. Most of the towns we work for, we tend to work reactively. There's a problem, let's study that specific problem area. Not too many towns look ahead and say, let's study everything and find out what we've got and then make some informed decisions from there. So it was a kind of a treat for us to be able to do it that way. Just a little background on the village, and I'm sure this is not news to you, but we're dealing with about 2 square miles of area. And obviously you're a historic town. You've been around since 1875, and you were designed by the famed architect Frederick Law Olmsted. And why we mentioned that, this is one thing I was able to learn throughout the process of the study, which I found interesting. his layout of the town and the design resulted in, it was very important the way the houses were set on the properties and the way the streets were laid out. In his mind, it was for the vistas and the views, but it ends up being really important for stormwater management, the way drainage happens. And then another important feature is the fact that your sewer infrastructure it's pretty old. I mean, you've been around for a long time. You've had an atlas since 1936, so most of the sewers that we're studying have been in the ground for a long time. So our objectives of this study were to develop this H&H model of your sewer system. H&H stands for hydrology and hydraulics. Hydrology is basically when it rains, how much of that water soaks into the ground, how much runs off. And then the hydraulics is where does it go, what happens once it gets into your sewer, how much, what kind of capacity do you have. And as Peter mentioned, another objective was to take this model, this computer model that we're going to build, it's going to spit out all this data. It's really good stuff to have, to be able to plan improvements in the future. It's completely integrated and meshed with your GIS, your Geographic Information System. And it'll allow us to update it and modernize it. And then finally, the third goal was to come up with a handful of projects based on what we learned of the system to give us kind of the best bang for the buck. Where are the areas that we should turn to first when we start to look to improve the system? So as was mentioned, Riverside is primarily a combined sewer system, which means that there's one pipe in the street which carries both the storm water. When it rains, the water gets into the sewers, and it also is connected to everybody's home. All your household waste goes into the same sewer. There are a few intermittent storm sewer systems that discharge directly to the river. They're generally on the west side of the village. There are some relief sewers that have been built over the years that supplement capacity. And all those different sewers go to one of three places. Either the Des Plaines River, the storm sewers discharge directly to the river. There's the MWRD interceptor pipe, and then there's the TARP system. These are basically big MWRD pipes that collect that combined sewer water and take it to be treated. So this graphic depicts that. Up here, this is your local combined sewer. These are the sewers that are on all the streets that pick up all the water from the streets and also from the yards. And you can see from the picture here, your house is also tied into that same pipe. And that drains through the network of streets, and it's first connected to the MWRD interceptor pipe. In Riverside, it's most places it's an 84-inch pipe. It's a big pipe, and it flows to the south to the Stickney plant where it's treated. And then when that pipe eventually fills up, water's got to go somewhere. Historically, it would have flowed directly out to the river. That's called a combined sewer overflow, a CSO. And obviously, when that happens, you've got some unhealthy water going out to the river. That's what we try to avoid that. So over the past few decades, you're probably aware the MWRD has been building their TARP system, their tunnel and reservoir plan, that basically intercepts all that water that used to go to the river, collects it in these giant tunnels underground, and take it to one of several reservoirs. That system is not complete. It's still under construction. So it does and frequently fills, and it has a finite capacity. And when it fills, those CSOs still happen, and there are 3 of those in the village, those CSO locations. So when we start to put together this model, we need data. We need data from a number of different places. One being the village's sewer atlas. You do have an atlas in GIS form already. But a lot of times we still turn to the historic atlas. Sometimes we just find a little different information there. We went to the MWRD. We pulled all their plans to make sure we knew exactly what they had in the ground and how your system connects into theirs. We went out and we did some survey of our own. And then we used the Cook County topography to see the contours of land and where water drains. So when we start to review all this data, the first thing that we start to determine is where are the major watersheds, the minor watersheds, where are the systems that come together. And we identified 4 major and 3 minor, and they're shown here on this figure. You can probably see them better in your packets. But I'll talk through them briefly. The biggest one here on the east side of the village in yellow, we're calling the East Combined Watershed. It's strictly combined sewers here. The main sewer is a trunk that runs down Delaplane down to Ogden and ties into an MWRD sewer along the river. That area is, that watershed is about 315 acres. It's the largest of these systems. In green here, we call the Olmsted watershed. That's drained by a relatively small pipe, a 26-inch pipe on Olmsted that ties into an MWRD sewer. And then in pink here, kind of in the center part of town, we call that the Central Combined Watershed. Again, combined sewers. Its main trunk sewer runs right down through the center of town here. That's a 48-inch pipe that ties into the MWRD sewer. The remaining systems, this one in blue here, Maplewood, this is the largest storm system you've got. This one is completely separated, so everything in blue here drains directly out to the river. That watershed is 80 acres. The two remaining, the area west of the river, there's a storm sewer system that comes across the river right at the railroad there. We call that the railroad watershed. And finally, Scottswood watershed. I'll probably refer to this as the peninsula at some point because that's kind of what I've been calling it. This area is partially storm, partially combined, but it connects to a combined sewer that runs right along here. So that's kind of the lay of the land. Those are the 7 major systems. And then there's some areas that aren't colored. They just aren't a real defined system, but they all drain one way or another, either to the river or to the combined sewer system. So this figure shows, we talked about how all those local combined sewers connect into the MWRD facility. Just to give you an idea where those are. In red here, this is the interceptor sewer. So this is the one that picks up all that, it's the first sewer to pick up all that water. That's an 84-inch pipe that runs generally north to south and flows down eventually to their Stickney treatment plant. And then there is this blue line that runs south to north, kind of to the west. This is one of the TARP tunnels. This is a 10-foot tunnel. It's many feet deep, and it connects to a tunnel on First Avenue. So the interceptor sewer is the primary source where the water goes. When that one gets full, it dumps into the TARP tunnel. And I mentioned those CSL locations. One down here on the south from that East Combined watershed. One right here, that's from the Central. And then the third one is actually, there's another slide that will show it, but it's right over here. So after we've kind of divided the system up into these parts, we start to plug them into the model. And the first thing we think about is what rainfall information are we going to put in? What storms are we going to model? And we do a bunch of what we call design storms. You'll hear the 1-year storm, the 2-year storm. These are probably terms you've heard before. What's important is that every year storm has a number of different durations. We describe it by the year and then what duration. And what we do is we look at a whole bunch of different durations. We simulate it to say, well, maybe it's going to rain 30 minutes, maybe it's going to rain for 6 hours, and that, of course, produces different responses from the watershed. And we did that for the village here, and the storm that we're most concerned about that produces the most amount of runoff is generally the 2-hour storm. So when we talk about, in this presentation, when we're talking about the 5-year storm, we're talking about the 5-year 2-hour storm. So these are all depths that would fall in 2 hours of time. So a 5-year 2-hour storm is 2.2 inches. When we talk about a 10-year storm, we're talking about 2.6 inches in 2 hours. Subbasins are the next component of the model. This is how we split up the watershed. We look at the contours. We look at if a drop of water falls on the ground, where is it going to go? How does it follow the topography of the land, and where does it go? And we split up the town, the village, into 380 of those subbasins. So the average area is less than 3 acres. So even though we're studying the entire village, we've got a really good level of detail. We're really breaking it down to a small detail. And that's what this figure shows. So every one of these red lines is an individual subbasin. So for every one of these areas, we calculate how much water is running off of that subbasin per given storm. The next component of the model, obviously an important one, are the sewers. We need to know where are they, how big are they, what slope are they, what direction do they flow, all those sorts of things. And we get those from your sewer atlas. Here's a picture of what your paper atlas looks like. A lot of this information is now in your GIS system, but you'll see on here, like this would be the size of the pipe. There's lengths, there's invert elevations. This is kind of the backbone where we get a lot of the information on the sewers themselves. Sure.
If I could just ask a question,
Sure.
which I'm wondering about, and I imagine the folks at home might be wondering as
Sure.
well. The 2-hour storm, is that just the most common storm? Is that why you chose that for the modeling,
No.
or why?
No, we look at what storm produces the most amount of runoff. So it's not always a 2-hour storm. It could be a 1-hour storm. It could be a 6-hour storm. Obviously, a 6-hour storm is not as intense. It's spread out over a long period of time. But it has to do with just the topography of the watershed, the characteristics of the watershed. Different storms will produce different amounts of runoff. So we look at which one produces the most. That's what we want to size things for. That's the one we want to look at.
So
This is
I
your
guess
worst-case scenario.
I'm sorry?
Your worst-case scenario is what we're...
Okay, but I'm not getting why a 2-hour storm would produce more runoff than a 6-hour storm, I guess, is what I'm not understanding.
Because it falls in a shorter period of time. It's more intense.
Oh, when it's concentrated.
It's more
Okay, all right,
concentrated,
okay.
yes.
All right.
Yeah, and if anyone, feel free to jump in and stop me if something doesn't make sense, or if you have a question, I'd rather you stop me now. Okay, so the last component of the model, down here at the bottom, what we call overland flow and depressional areas. These are, where does the water go when the sewers can't handle it anymore? It gets to the surface and it starts to follow the topography. And we need to put that information into the model so it knows how to calculate all of that. And this picture here shows an example of what we would call overland flow. You can, I guess, not see that well in front of you, but you can see in this picture, the sewers are probably full. They can't get, no more water can get in, so you start to see water collecting on the surface and flowing down the street, following the grade of the street. This is what we call overland flow, and you have this throughout the village. Many of the towns that we deal with have more of these, what we call depressional areas. This is not Riverside. Typically, those overland flow routes tend to converge on these depressional areas. These would be areas where the streets, for whatever reason, are just lower. And all those overland flow routes converge, and you may get 100, 200 acres draining to one block that happens to receive, the brunt of that runoff. You have very few of these in the village, and you should be thankful that. That goes back to what we talked about, the Olmsted design. There are a few, yeah. I didn't say there were none.
Our street looks much worse than that. That's not the river, it's the village.
Right. But in general, the overland flow routes all continue and actually either lead to the river or out of the village. So we don't have to deal with this in too many locations. One area that you do have it tend to be in these rear yard areas. So this is just one example. All these colored lines on here are the contour lines, and wherever you see a closed line, that's an enclosed area. So the water could be trapped in there. And so in these rear yard areas, the water just kind of sits and doesn't have anywhere to go. It soaks into the ground, or eventually it will flow out onto the streets. So we put all that information, we identify all these different areas where water can collect and be stored, and we put all that information into the model. So in summary, these are the major components of the model. We take all that information, we put it in, and of course, like magic, it starts to shoot out the answers. And the answer that we're looking for is, what is the capacity of your system? Well, unfortunately, that's a bit of a nebulous term. It's a little ambiguous. There's different ways that we can define capacity. So I wanted to talk about a couple different terms, the way we would describe it, just to give you an understanding of what that term means. The three different terms we'll talk about are the full flow capacity, the pressure flow, and then the overland flow. And so we've got a little graphic, little cartoon that would be, this is your sewer system. Obviously, the sewers, here's a typical manhole, street elevation on top. And as it starts to rain, water comes into the system, and just by gravity starts to flow downhill. This is just run-of-the-mill flow. And as the storm gets bigger, we get more rain coming in, it starts to fill up that pipe, and very logically, when the pipe is full, however much water it's carrying, that's what we call the full flow. That's just based strictly on the size of the pipe and the slope of the pipe. That's one way to say what the capacity is. But that's not the most flow that the pipe can carry. We know when we get these big storms, we get more and more water starting to come into the system. And when that happens, of course, the water level in the system rises. And that rising water puts everything under pressure, and it pushes more water through. We call that being surcharged. So when the pipe is surcharged, it's carrying a little more flow. It's able to push it through faster. And your engineering 101 term of the day, if you were to connect all the lines in the system, all those points, that creates a line that we call the hydraulic grade line. It's nothing more than an indication of where the water level is at a certain point at a certain time. That's the hydraulic grade line. That may be a term that you'll hear later. So that is the description of a surcharge condition. And then when we get these really big storms, eventually the sewers can't handle it. It gets up to the surface, and there we've got overland flow. So when we have overland flow, at that point, that's really the maximum flow that the sewers can handle. We call that overland flow. So, like I mentioned, we have all this information in the model. We run all these different storms, and it simulates what's the capacity. And really, the answer to that question kind of lives in the model. It's really built to be viewed in the model and to be interpreted that way. So one of our challenges is how do we put it on paper in a way that makes sense? And we've done that in three different ways. These are three different sets of exhibits that are in the report. Surcharge depths, overland flow paths, and then something we call the sewer capacity atlas. Here's an example of a surcharge depth exhibit. You've got these in the report. What this drawing shows, every dot on the drawing here represents a manhole. It's a point in the sewer system. And we've color-coded them and broken them down into, you see in the legend there, a green dot means that hydraulic grade line, that water level, is at least 3 or more feet below the surface, below the street level. 3 foot was just kind of an arbitrary number that we picked. There's really nothing important about 3 feet. The yellow dots mean it's somewhere above that 3 foot line and street level, so it's near the surface. And then the red dots mean that water level it's above street level, so you would have overland flow like we talked about. So here's the 1 year storm. You can see generally most of the areas are green. You do have some yellow and you even have some red. So there's some areas where even in a storm as small as 1 year, you're going to get some surcharging and overland flow. And we've got these exhibits for the 1, the 2, the 5, and the 10-year storm, and I'll flip through those in a second. And you'll see how basically the color coding of the dots changes as the storm gets larger and the capacity gets smaller. And a good way to see that is in the blow up here. That's why we showed that. So note the green dots on this slide as we move to the 2 year, fewer green dots, more yellow dots, more red dots, indicating that throughout the system the water level is rising and it's getting closer to the surface.
Now, as the water level rises closest to the surface, and I'm looking at that strip that goes, that must be Burlington, the red dots that go across.
Correct.
It's on the 1 year. As the water level gets closer to the surface, does that naturally push the water level, push the sewage back into the basements? Is that where we see the most flooding problems?
Yeah, that's why this, this 3-foot number, it's, like I said, it's not a magic number, but really what these exhibits are good for, it gives you an indication of where that water level is relative to your basement. So the answer to your question is yes. If there's no flood control system on the house, if there's no overhead sewers or flood valve or backflow valve, if your basement is lower than that elevation, that's when you would get the sewer back up. Yeah. So these would give you an indication of maybe areas where the basement backups would be more common. Going forward, again, as we move from the 2-year to the 5-year, you've got much fewer greens, more yellows, and a lot more reds. And then forward again to the 10-year. Where at the 10-year, this is the 10-year, I think it was 2.6 inches in 2 hours, so a pretty intense rainstorm. If that happens, most of the water is going to be moving along the surface of the streets because the sewers are going to be full. And this is a good picture because if we were to design this today, we'd want these all to be green. Obviously, we're not designing it today. This was probably never designed. It was built back in 100 years ago, smaller than we would do it today. And as a result, you've got all these surcharge sewers that aren't ideal. It's not what we want. It's not the way we design today. But that's really the findings of the study. So those are what we call the surcharge depth exhibits. The next are the overland flow exhibits. Sure.
I just want to go back to something that Mr. Ballerine asked, because I think it was a really important point. I want to make sure it's clarified. Can you explain again about the relationship between the hydraulic grade line and because you say in your report here, if the HDL increases above a basement floor drain or plumbing outlet, that's when you get the sewer backup. So it's not that if any part of your basement is 3 feet, you're talking about
right. If you have a floor drain that drains out by gravity to the sewer in the street, the water level is going to rise. So as the water level in the street sewer rises, it's going to rise up in your basement to equalize.
Right.
So if you don't have an overhead plumbing system or some sort of a check valve or a backflow prevention valve, the water level in the street sewer is going to be the same as it is in your basement.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. This exhibit shows the overland flow routes. In your report, you've got them for all the storms. The presentation here will just show the 10-year. The key thing to know here is basically this corresponds to the previous slide. So we're in the surcharge depth, all the red dots where we show the water is above the surface. Here on this map basically shows where it goes. So if you were to zoom in there, you'd see the direction of flow. But this map basically connects the dots, connects the red dots, and shows where the water moves along the surface. And then the final way that we try to present the results of this modeling is this document we prepared called the Sewer Capacity Atlas, where we've essentially broken the village out into a grid. There's 15 sheets. And here we're able to look at it on a really block by block, street by street level, and all the pertinent engineering data that is not too exciting to talk about right now, but all those numbers are shown here. So you can look at each individual sewer to see how, what size it is, how much flow is it carrying, all those sorts of parameters. So that really is the first bullet point, our first objective, the evaluation of the existing sewer system. Those exhibits are the way that we can display the results. They're also in the GIS system that, like we mentioned, meshes with the system you have, so all that information is there digitally. And if you've got particular questions on the existing system before I move on, maybe you want to do that?
I was going to actually ask that. Do we have any questions about before he goes to the improvement? I have one. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask? The combined sewer overflows or outlets. That is outlets.
Overflow.
Overflow.
Yep.
So just to make sure, I want to make sure how this thing works. So first it would go into the interceptor.
Yep.
And yeah, if you can bring that. Naturally, my question is like the third slide you showed.
We'll get back there.
It takes me a while to get there, you know. If you can back up to the
figure? This
that,
one?
yeah.
Okay.
So it goes into the combined sewer, and does it automatically go out of the CSO if there is a CSO on that line, or does it first go into the interceptor? And it only goes into the CSO if the interceptor is full?
It will first go into the interceptor, and this obviously is a generic figure here, but the way that it's connected, it will dump directly into the interceptor and won't be able to get back out of the interceptor unless it's full and rises up to the surface.
And does that just happen automatically? Are there valves or gates or anything like that have to be open to allow this to happen?
No, that all happens automatically. I mean, there are gates at certain points of the MWRD system. Of course, this leads to the perception that someone closed the valve or opened the valve.
That's exactly where.
And that's always a point of contention after a flooding event. But as far as within the village and within the vicinity, there's no valves. It all happens automatically by gravity, just by flow of water. When the interceptor's full, there's nowhere else for the water to go. It'll just flow out to the tarp, and then if the tarp is full, it will flow out to the river.
Okay, so it's interceptor, tarp, and then CSO in that order.
Correct.
CSOs are not common. I mean, only in very old villages, because we have to have them monitored all the time. I mean,
well, they're probably more common than you think. That was typical of the area throughout the past decades. The purpose of the TARP system was to try to eliminate those CSO events. Really, people think of it as a flood control project, which it is, but it really primarily was an environmental project to try to eliminate those CSOs. I think I heard a stat that the whole TARP system, the tunnel system, only holds like 1 inch of rain. So if you get more than 1 inch of rain, it's still going to fill that system, but that is enough to take the vast majority of those combined sewer events, CSO events.
what happens if, now, as you're pointing there, the CSO is dumping into the river? What happens if the river level is higher than the CSO pipe?
When that happens, that will block that to some extent, but as it recedes, it'll start to drain out back into the river.
But are you asking whether that causes backup?
Does that cause a backup of the water? Since it's all flowing this way, does it then stop it and cause everything to back up as we?
It doesn't. There are backflow valves in the system that prevent the river from flowing back into it, but the water basically just kind of sits in the system until the river drops low enough that it can.
So there's like a big check valve that stops that from happening.
Correct.
So with regard to what you were, because I've lived here a long time, and it seems like every time we have a flood, there are these rumors that somebody didn't open something that they should have. Can you, with regard to how our system works, is there any truth to any of those
With
myths?
regard to your system, no. There's no mechanical valves on your system as far as how you tie into the MWRD system. Once the water's in the interceptor or in the tarp, I don't know exactly what controls the MWRD has on it in the region, but as far as on this slide, at these points where you connect in, there's no valves to be closed or anything like that.
I thought we had more connections to the TARP tunnel than the Metropolitan Tunnel. Do we have more than one? Isn't there one over by the high school? A drop shaft to the...
Well, this blue line, this is the TARP tunnel.
Right.
It goes off the page here, and actually right at First Avenue, there's a connection to another major TARP tunnel.
Right, and that drops to the deep tunnel, right?
The deep tunnel is another term for the TARP system.
Okay.
But yeah, the one that's on First Avenue is particularly deep and particularly large. I think it's a 33-foot diameter.
33, right. But that's part of the deep tunnel project?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And when are the rest of when the rest of the reservoirs with the TARP system are supposed to come online? Are there two that still aren't finished?
There's 2 reservoirs under construction, and there's some phasing to them. I think there's a temporary reservoir that's online. I thought the last I saw was like 2017 was when the McCook Reservoir would be online. I think that's correct.
Anything else? Thank you.
So let me skip back forward. So now we'll talk about, we've established the existing system capacity, the parameters. We know everything there is to know about it. So now we're going to look at what sorts of projects would we recommend. Not necessarily what are the main problem areas, but given what we know about the system, what sort of projects would we recommend would be, I'll use the term low-hanging fruit, which would be the easiest to get to work on right away, that maybe take advantage of some opportunities that your system gives us. For each one of those projects, we're looking for, of course, the lowest cost, things that we can easily construct. And always, we're looking for projects that reduce the potential for basement backups, sanitary backups. And wherever possible, we're looking for areas that we can separate out the sewers. That's just good environmental practice, and it's good to, it helps with basement backups to eliminate that connection to the combined system. And those are things that are consistent with the village's green initiative. And then beyond those projects, we've identified 8 projects here. Beyond that, the work we've done will serve as a kind of a backbone, like a template to develop other projects if there's even longer term planning that we want to do. So this drawing shows the location of the 8 projects. They're scattered throughout the village. And we'll present them in the order that we would recommend them being implemented. So this drawing, I mentioned one of the goals would be to separate the sewers. We want, and ideally we would move from a combined system to more storm sewer, separate storm sewer systems. This exhibit shows where you're at today. Everything in blue is drained by storm sewer. So everything in blue goes to the river. Everything in red goes to the MWRD, goes to the combined system. So you can see that the vast majority of the village is combined sewers. And we're going to want to, at the end of the presentation, I'll show you a drawing that will show if we were to implement these projects, how this map would change and how we'd get more blue area, more storm area, and less combined area. So the first project is in what we're calling the railroad watershed. It's the area west of the river. And basically this project, the area that's shaded in green, this 40 acres, already has storm sewers out there. They've been separated. They all come across and converge at a point just south of the railroad here. They cross under the river, and then they tie into a combined sewer. And this combined sewer flows to the east into the MWRD system. But basically we're introducing 40 acres of water into this 24-inch pipe, and that pipe happens to be the one that connects to all the basements in this Scottswood area. So we want to take that water off the system. And because the storm sewers are already on the ground, this is the lowest hanging of our lowest hanging fruit. Very simply, before it crosses under the river, we would block that pipe, give it a new outlet to the river. In doing so, we've separated this 40 acres very easily, and we've taken that load off of the combined sewer, and it helps helps our neighbors downstream. So this project has an estimated cost of $64,000. It's essentially a couple manholes and 50 feet of pipe. It's a very simple project. So the second project goes hand in hand with the first. The Scottswood area here, this peninsula, everything you see on the screen here is existing. So these red lines or these maroon lines, these are the existing combined sewers. So all these streets, all the household drainage, the sanitary water, everything connects into this 24-inch line. In fact, there it is right there. So this line ties into the MWRD system. At times it backs up. Like we just mentioned, this 40 acres from the west drains into this relatively small 24-inch pipe, and that causes backups in this whole area. Project 2 is primarily a project that will help with basement backups. So we've already talked about Project 1 would eliminate that area. The next step then would be to remove all the water from that 24-inch line. And the way we would do that is go through this whole peninsula, look at every street. Where does the inlet go? Right now, there's inlet on one side of the street might go to the storm sewer, the other side of the street might go to a combined sewer. It's really scattered in this area. So we would go through and make sure everything goes to a storm sewer, add new storm sewer where needed. That's what is shown in yellow here. utilize existing outlets to the river. And in doing this project, we would basically eliminate all the stormwater that's getting into that 24-inch pipe up here on the north, the one that's causing the backups. One thing I neglected to mention, earlier I mentioned there were 3 CSO locations. I only showed you 2. Here's the third one. Basically right at the bridge here, there's a point where some storm sewers tie into the combined sewer, and they also have a CSO out to the river. So this is actually one spot where it doesn't tie into an interceptor. If the combined sewer, the local combined sewer doesn't have enough capacity, it goes right out to the river.
When we looked at the 10-year chart, the surcharge depths for 10-year storm, what I noticed was that area was the area that had the most green dots.
Well, the reason for that is because some of this area is drained by storm. It's not connected to the combined system. The areas that are, how do I say this? They're not in our model because they're not conveying the water in this area. But because they are connected to this, they're still getting backups. So I guess to be more complete in there, we could show dots that aren't necessarily draining water but still receive backup, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Also, the goal, really, when we talk about the various projects, is where could we, and that's, I think, probably why this one was identified, areas where we can completely separate the 2 systems with not much work, and that's why this is one of the projects that's been identified.
Yeah, when we looked at this area, the first thing that jumped out at us is, well, the proximity to the river. You're right there, and there's probably 8 different storm sewers that already outlet to the river, but they'll drain like one intersection. So we would take advantage of those existing outlets and just expand off of those to expand the storm sewer system. That's what we show in yellow here. This project would eliminate that combined sewer overflow. That'd be one large benefit of it. And as far as the cost, that's a $1.6 million project. I'll mention that it doesn't have to be done in one piece. All these segments could be done independently. Basically, the more you do, the more water you're pulling off of that combined system, and the fewer basement backups you'll have in this area.
What are you suggesting for stormwater pipe size? Going to something at least 24?
Well, in this area, we talked about overland flow. You've got really good overland flow routes to the river. So once you've separated them and the basement backups aren't a concern, it doesn't matter so much whether the water is getting to the river through the pipe or overland. We would basically take advantage of the outlet pipes that are there. We wouldn't want to replace those if we didn't have to, because you're dealing maybe with forest preserve or you're dealing with different properties. So we'd kind of be dictated by what's out there. If there's a 24-inch outlet, we would continue a 24-inch storm. If there's a 12-inch outlet, we use a 12-inch pipe.
So are we basically getting the water to the river faster? Storm water to the river faster?
All right. You're adding a very small percentage of water to the river. Right now, that water gets to the river either through overland flow or through that combined sewer overflow. So you're getting it directly to the river. Overall, it's a benefit because you're eliminating that CSO. And in the larger scheme of things, with the huge drainage area of the Des Plaines River, this is really minuscule.
But as more communities north of us start to do all this, the river gets, all those incremental amounts add up to a bigger amount into the river, correct?
They do, and one of the things, I haven't talked about permits for any of these. If you're doing a new outfall, a new permit, you need to get a permit a new outlet to the river, you need to get a permit for that. And that's one of the things that we would need to demonstrate to the state, that doing so is not going to cause any increase in the level of the river. All right, so I mentioned 1 and 2 go together. Projects 1 and 2 would kind of go hand in hand. Project 3 is really a standalone project on Maplewood. And what happens here, this is one of our already separated sewer systems, but we've got a lot of overland flow area that comes down, and this is one of those depressional areas that I mentioned. All the water from those 80 acres or so collects down in this area. And this is also a spot where when the river gets really high, when you're really at flood stage, you get overbank flood from the river that fills this area. So this project would just give some more capacity, an additional outlets to the system. We're showing a 30-inch pipe. We basically, the project would include a handful of inlets at that lowest point to collect the water and send it out to the river, so that when you get that overland flow, when you get ponding in the street, it allows us to get it out to the river. And that's got an estimated cost of $150,000. Project number 4, Long Common project. It's got 2 pieces, a north and a south. And what we're trying to do in this project here, everything that's shown in green, this is the Long Common watershed. It also has separate, it's got storm sewer, it's not combined. You see it in here, this blue line goes right down Long Common. And it used to drain out to the river, but it was picked up and connected into the TARP system. The reason for that was because right up here, there's a relief sewer, and that connects flow from the combined watershed to the east into that storm sewer watershed. So in effect, it brings that combined sewer water into the storm sewer. Well, we looked at a way, how can we eliminate that connection so that we can separate out, restore this going to the river and separate those areas out. This slide just shows a blow-up of that connection area. The pipe in green here is that relief sewer. The black is the combined sewer from the east watershed. The blue is the storm sewer from the Long Common watershed. And the green is the one that connects them, and that's the one that we want to get rid of. If we can get rid of that connection, now that entire Long Common watershed we can separate and take out to the river. So the project would be, well, how do you eliminate that cross connection? Well, very simply, you block it. So we eliminate the connection between the two, but we need to recreate what it did. That 42-inch pipe provided a relief to the combined sewer. It allowed it to dump into the storm. We need to recreate that because we don't want to cause problems where there's not problems today. We don't want to make things worse for anybody. And the way we're doing that here is with an underground storage vault. That's what's shown shaded here. So the project would be reroute the combined sewers around this area. That's the yellow here. And then inside this parkway, we would dig out and build these concrete vaults. And rather than the combined water overflowing into the storm, it would overflow into this concrete vault. The vault would hold it until the water level recedes, and then it would drain back into the combined sewer. A couple of things I'll mention here. We've determined the volume that we need. That's the 6.5 acre feet. That's a term, an engineering term, but basically it would be, if you had an area that was 1 acre in size, it would be 6.5 feet deep of water. That's 6.5 acre feet. The vault that we're talking about using is 8 feet deep, so we would need an area of about 3/4 of an acre to fit this vault in. The area in blue here is larger than that. It's about 1 acre. And then we also have some flexibility to maybe put that under some streets. Or the point I'm trying to get to is that the footprint is not set. We know these parkway areas are valued resources, and the trees in those parkways as well. And certainly there would be some impacts to those, but it's possible we could maybe configure it to stay in the center of the parkway. The point I want to make is that those impacts have not been determined at this point. If you wanted to go forward with this project, we would take a closer look, a more detailed look at what that footprint would look like and what those impacts would be. So here's the north part of the project. We put this large storage vault in the ground. Here's a kind of a schematic of an example of what those vaults look like. Obviously, we wouldn't have a parking lot in a shopping center on top of it, but they're just kind of concrete holding tanks that stack together. And then the second part of the project is down by the river. Here's the Long Common storm sewer. We've separated out all the combined water from it. We've got pure storm, so we can take it out to the river, eliminate this TARP connection so we no longer get that back up. The cost of this project is $2.8 million. Now, Project 4 allows us to do Project 5, some more sewer separation. It's on Nuttall. This yellow circle here is the project we just talked about. This is where we're going to eliminate that 42-inch pipe that was overflowing from the combine. In doing so, it frees up a bunch of capacity in the storm sewer. And so we can take advantage of that by separating out an area and bringing it back into that sewer. And we chose this Nuttall area because it's in close proximity. We don't have to put a lot of sewers in the ground to do that. There's some existing storm sewers in there already that we would take advantage of. And we're able to separate out another 40 acres relatively easily. So it's a straightforward project. We would extend some storm sewers up in these areas and then tie it into that main long common storm sewer. But again, this one, we couldn't do this project unless you were to do Project 4. And the cost of that is $570,000. Project number 6, we're just calling rear yard storm sewer connections. These are the areas we talked about where there's depressional areas in the rear yards that hold water. And the project would be, we would look at these on a sort of a typical basis. It would just be, obviously there'd be a lot of coordination with the property owners, but putting some drain structures in the low points, some catch basins, connecting them with small pipes and draining them out to the streets. Small pipes so that we're not overloading the sewer system, but yet we're allowing it to drain quicker than it does today where it just soaks into the ground. We show 3 here as examples, but this could be extrapolated to other areas. And as a generalized, we're calculated a cost of about $75,000 for each one of these rear yard areas. And finally, we've got projects 7 and 8. I'll talk about them together because these, you would do one or the other. You wouldn't do 7 and 8, you would do 7 or 8. This deals with the Olmsted watershed. That was a 100-acre watershed that was drained by only a 26-inch pipe, so it doesn't have real good capacity. So the first thing we looked at was this Project 7, where because some of the other projects would take away a lot of water that's going to the MWRD, we would maybe go back to them and say, hey, we want to upsize the pipe we have, the connection we have. We want to put more water into your system, or at least put it there faster in this particular spot. So we would basically replace the existing pipe with a larger one, 36 inches what we're showing, following the path of the existing combined sewer. And it has really good benefits as far as capacity and basement backups along this path. The bubbles in white here show really the areas that would benefit most from this project. But you can see they're kind of limited to where that new combined sewer is. And again, this would be a new combined sewer, not a new storm sewer. And so we determined a cost for that project at $960,000. Didn't seem like the cost benefit made a lot of sense there, so we took it the next step. Well, you know, if you're going in that deep, you might as well look at separating this area out. So improvement 8 would be a more involved project, but generally this watershed then would be separated. We put a new storm sewer system there, drain it out to the river. We'd be able to separate 56 acres at a cost of $1.6 million. So going back a few steps, this is our existing condition map of the storm versus combined. The storm sewers are in blue, the combined sewer areas are in red. And if you were to implement all of these projects, here's where you would be as far as how much the village would be storm versus combined. In the call out, show the different project areas that would achieve that change. And if longer term than this, these 8 projects would get us this far. Beyond that, it would take much larger projects of probably another order of magnitude to continue to separate out the rest of the red area.
Can I ask you this somewhat simple question?
Sure.
and it's so simple it may be stupid. If we have 3,200 households in the village, and you say that when we started talking in the very beginning, you said that backup would come into a house unless it had an overhead sewer or a check valve. If we have, it's just because I can't do math very well, if we had 3,000 households and it cost $3,000 per household to put a check valve in, wouldn't it be just cheaper to spend $1 million to put a check valve in every house?
That would be things that a lot of villages have developed grant programs for that. Typically, I've heard between $6,000 and $10,000 to do overhead plumbing. Check valves would be something less reliable than overhead plumbing. But yeah, that's certainly one way that you could approach it.
Now, what would be the long-term, what would be the negative effect of that environmentally? I would assume, because if you shut off all the sewage from coming back into people's houses, it's going to go downhill. But eventually, it all goes downhill anyway because it drains out of the house anyway.
Right. Yeah, doing it in a fashion like that with a large scale, individual house flood protection. You don't eliminate any of those combined sewers, and you're still treating all that water. So looking at the big picture, as far as outside the village, you're still spending money to treat all that stormwater, and then you still have the environmental effects of dumping that water into the river during these big storms. That's why you're not able to help either one of those issues by looking at the check valves. But
But I could solve the whole village's basement flooding issue for $2 million.
Probably more
check the
than
math.
that, Joe. I just had an estimate on it for my house, and it was going to be $12,000 to $15,000 to
No,
put
I
in
had
an
a check
overhead
valve,
sewer.
and
Yeah.
they told me it would be $2,500 to $3,000 to put a check valve in my front yard.
Do you have an overhead sewer?
Right, sewer in the ground.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it's not the same. I mean,
I have a bathroom in the basement, I have sewers in the basement, and it goes underneath my front lawn, and it falls into Delaplane Road.
well, I don't think it would work that way for.
Yeah, explain it.
Sorry, yeah. The overhead sewer is basically if you've got plumbing fixtures in your basement. Right now, your floor drain, if you've got a bathroom down there. Some homes have an ejector pit. So all that plumbing water will go to a pump that then pumps it up and then back down. Basically, that pump acts as a hydraulic brake so that it's not hydraulically connected directly to the streets. So that when the street backs up, it's not able to back directly up into your basements. Historically, in an older home, that water might just drain right out the basement floor, it goes out low and out to the street. And as the street level, the water in the street rises, the street sewer, it starts to back up into your basement. So if you do an overhead plumbing conversion, they'll actually open up your floor, redirect those plumbing lines into a pit, put a pump in there and pump it up so that the water no longer backs directly up into your basement. That's overhead plumbing.
But a check valve stops the water from backing up into the basement in the first place, though, correct?
You need the overhead sewer in order to put the check valve.
Yeah. They work in tandem.
You have a newer house, so you probably have overhead.
And the $3,000 cost for the check valve is independent of the cost associated with putting in the overhead sewer, which is a more significant budget.
But just to follow up on that, if you were to do that, wouldn't you increase the amount of sewage going through the CSO? Because in essence, right now, aren't our basements kind of storage reservoirs during a flood event like that?
In theory, and that's a question we get from time to time where we'll looking at a block or a few blocks, and the residents will ask, well, if everybody puts these in, is it, if I put one in, am I making it worse for my neighbor? Or if we all put one in, are we making it worse in general? And research we've done on that shows that it's just there's not enough basement volume to make a difference. Now, if you're talking 3,000 homes in the entire village, I don't know the answer to that, if that would make a measurable difference or not.
Okay. Other questions? Anything from the folks attending? Any questions?
I think Brookfield's offered a grant program related to check valves or overhead sewage, so if you guys want to look at that, I know they have that. We put that in our house 7
During this study, were you looking at the condition of the pipe? Were you actually, did you view any footage, any video of existing conditions?
No, it wasn't in our scope to do any televising, extensive televising. I know
Okay.
we've probably done some of that just in general. We've probably done that in general in some locations, but not comprehensively throughout the village.
Just reiterating on that, I do have a copy of all of the televised sewers that have been done today. And we have categorized those in a condition already, separate from this.
Okay.
So we do have a prioritized list of conditions on sewers that have already been televised.
The only reason I ask is, Ed, I know you have your wish list of sewer projects, and are any of these projects tie in with what you have on the forecast for the near future?
In the aftermath of this project, we would kind of rethink. You know, we had some initiatives previously before this project was initiated and now completed. And now that this project, the village-wide comprehensive sewer system evaluation is completed, what we should be doing, and I expect we will do, is rethink these other initiatives we had. Because it may not make sense to push forward the project that's rather limited in scope when following this presentation, there might be better ways to spend that same money that will have much more benefit. So I think we're going to go through a process of rethinking, prioritization. You could call it game planning also, and part of this now becomes financial planning also.
Okay.
That component comes forward, and that's I think a staff task, and then the staff would probably at some point, I assume, present to the village board some sort of 5 or 10 year plan for sewer system improvements.
If I wanted to get the maximum bang for my buck, the way it sounds is I would do, well, it depends on what the buck I had, but 1, 2, 3, and 8 for $3.5 million, $3.6 million would give me quite a big relief to this village.
1, 2, and 3 for sure. I think 4 or 5 versus 8 would be maybe a. We ranked them this way for a reason. Basically, if you look at 4, the area that it separates per cost is a little. You get a lot more area to be separated out than you do for 8, but they're pretty close.
But 4 and 5 are, that's 3.5
Sure.
versus 1.6.
Sure, and one thing I didn't mention is these separation projects, 4 in particular, would take a lot of water away from the MWRD's treatment, and we would certainly approach them about participating or cost sharing on the project. They are accepting proposals for projects. They have given out some funding, so we think that these types of projects would be favorable. They look at them favorably, and that's something that we would approach them on.
Thank you very much. Sure. I just want to say to staff and to our engineers, this is a major accomplishment, I think, for our village. I've been in village government now for 6 years. Back 6 years ago, when we first started talking about even bringing the GIS in, and the idea of digitizing our utility atlas, and now we're seeing the accumulated progress of all that work, and this is really good work, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity to do it. We appreciate it.
Mr. Fowler?
Could Peter just kind of summarize what happens next?
Well, when we do have a number of projects identified, I think from kind of along the lines of what Ed was saying, one of the things that staff will do now is we'll go back and we will probably be bringing some of the projects back for board consideration to move forward. I think Ed and I and Orion, we're going to sit down and see whether the best time to do that would be during the budget period or individually start bringing these projects forward, because the Water and Sewer Fund does have some money available that could be used. But like Jim was saying, for number 4 in particular, I think we would approach the MWRD to see what type of funding we might be able to get from them that would maybe reduce that would then allow us to do something else.
This seems like to be an ideal candidate for the bond. I mean, I think it's easy. It's an easy sell to the residents, and we could. I mean, if we were able to put together a $4 million bond, we could. I mean, even with the slight price tax increase that would happen, the relief it would give the residents would be. And it seems like it would be smarter to do your sewers before you do your streets, because your sewers are under your streets.
Well,
You
one
have
of
to
the
tear
good,
up your streets to do your sewers.
one of the good things about this report now is, along with the street sufficiency study that we will be receiving from Burke, is we can now plan intelligently, that if we have a street that we know needs to be done and there's a sewer project that can be tied to it, we would approach it doing it combined rather than putting in a new street and tearing it up.
I was just wondering, do these numbers, most of these projects include, I assume, open cut, digging up streets. Do your numbers include repairing the streets?
Yes.
Okay, so that is
The
included in
numbers may
those
change,
numbers,
right.
yeah.
Anything else? Okay. Moving on, next on our agenda are a couple items from our police chief, Tom Weitzel. Mr. Weitzel, we're going to talk about coyotes again and the preliminary crime index. Sorry.
Mr. President and trustees, I'm coming back on the coyote issue because in late 2013, the manager and the board made some suggestions on alternatives the police department could do reference to coyotes issue and issue a year-end report. So I just wanted to follow up with the board to let them know that we did take care of those initiatives, both from the board and some residents that were here that night. With the help of Kathy Haley, we did e-flash back out the coyote policy and the checklist. It's now on the front page of the village's website. The Coyote Project video is back on the village's cable channel that was developed by DuPage County Forest Preserve District. The department has purchased air horns, portable air horns, the kinds that you'd see in an athletic event, for each squad car. It was a suggestion that if we used those at a close range, it would may be able to keep coyotes from coming back if the police actually have contact with them. The squad cars have been reissued all the general orders and the coyote policy and the checklist on a PDF that is now on the squad car computers. In addition to that, they have printouts available to give to the residents, those that want to see the police if they respond. And we're well underway working to a public program on coyotes from an expert out of Washington, D.C. with the National Wildlife Foundation. That project is being spearheaded now by the Safe Environment Commission and Officer Jeff Miller. They've already met on that issue. They're just trying to get a date probably in May for her to travel to Riverside and put that program on in the evening. She's also going to do a free program during the day about 2 o'clock in the afternoon for the police officers to train them on how to respond and how to react with coyotes. So that's well on its way. And those projects, I'll be back at the board probably when the public project is ready to go. And then I just wanted to issue the year-end sighting report. It's a first time ever. I thought it would be something that the board would be interested in, the public, because we created a code now in our computer system where we could track it. And with the upgrade to our computer system, we can also track time of day and et cetera. So for the 2013 calendar year, there's 383 sightings. Our computer data system broke daytime up from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and nighttime 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. just for data purposes. In that breakup, 82% of the sightings were on the day shift and 17% were after 6 p.m. And as I anticipated, 69% of the sightings were in beat 401. That's a computer-generated beat for squad car data. It's roughly designated by long common, bird, 26th Street and Des Plaines, Akenside area, that had the most sightings. So I included that report in our beat map. I plan on posting it on the website after it was shared with the board, and we'll make it public. So if you have any questions, I can answer. If not, I just want to, my intent was just to follow back up with the board at your direction.
Anything?
The other short report is the 2013 preliminary crime stats. These are the UCR reports that have to go to the state police and then are passed on to the FBI. It will show that Riverside's preliminary crime is up 21.3%. Looks like an alarming number, but as I usually state every year, we have a low crime altogether in Riverside. Only 171 reportable crimes. That is up from 141. We have very low violent crime and almost non-existent street crime. Of those numbers, 22 of the 30 increase can be attributed to one individual that was arrested for breaking into vehicles and garages in 2013. He since has gone to trial and was found guilty. So in essence, we would have only had 8 reportable crimes that would have been up from 2012, which would have given us a less than 2% increase. But when you have a town like Riverside that has very low overall crime, stats can be up and down very easily, and the percentages can look dramatic when the actual numbers really aren't. So that report I have to make available to the state police by March 1st. It's submitted electronically, and then they report to the governor in June, and the state police will post that statewide in July. At least that's their schedule of this year, 2013. So if you have any questions on the crime stats, I'd be happy to answer those too.
What's the difference between burglary and theft?
Burglary is, it depends on the type of force. The difference is the way the state police and the FBI classify it. So, for example, if somebody goes into your garage and uses no force, that's going to be a theft.
Okay.
If they kick in your service door, that's going to be a burglary. If they go in your house, it's going to be a burglary. The real confusing part is when it comes to automobiles, because there's theft from automobile and burglary to automobile. It kind of comes down to this. If they steal a component of your vehicle, it's a burglary. If they take the radio out of your dashboard, it's a burglary. If they steal your laptop out of your car, it's a theft.
So these theft figures, most are probably things taken out of vehicles?
Yes. Property crime continues to be our biggest reportable crime to the state police, and it has been since I've been chief in 2008, and it continues to be.
Okay.
Anything else? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Next up are the reports of village officers. I have just a few things this evening. First, I would ask for a motion to reappoint Mary Capistrano, Bob Finn, and Kathy Malone to the Landscape Advisory Commission with terms to expire June 1, 2015. Motion by Mr. Foley.
Second.
Second by Ms. Collins. These folks have all agreed to be reappointed. They've been longstanding members of the commission and do a great job for us, and they've agreed to stay on. Under normal circumstances, their terms would be for 3 years. They have asked to stay on so they can finish the master landscaping plan. So that is why their term is expiring shorter than the usual time. Any questions about that? If you could please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next, I would just like to, it seems like we're doing this every meeting, we continue to thank our Public Works Department for the extraordinary efforts they're making with regard to the relentless winter we're having. And I also greatly appreciate the work that you've done in a preemptive and proactive manner getting ready for the potential flooding that we're talking about. And the village manager will have the up-to-date information on that in just a second. But I know you've been out there chipping away at catch basins and doing everything that you can, and it's greatly appreciated. And the next thing, which is not so good, I just want to report to the board that at the District 96 school board meeting on the 18th, we had presented to them a proposal to cost share with regard to the school crossing guards. They rejected that proposal. We had proposed a 50-50 cost share agreement, in addition to which the village would have retained all of the cost of the equipment and administration of the program, so it in essence came up to a 60-40 proposal. They rejected that and have offered a 27% contribution, which is basically 22% of the overall cost. So that's what happened. I would suggest that we put this on our agenda for our next meeting to talk about how we want to move forward in administering the program in the future. That there's a consensus for that. Okay, thank you. And that is all I have. Mr. Manager?
Just a few items. The first is, as President Sells mentioned, the village has been monitoring the weather as well as river level. As of 5:45 this evening, the river level was up to 5.78 feet, which is still below the 7-foot flood stage. Ed and his crew have been very proactive the last few days in clearing catch basins. We had sand delivered to a couple of the locations that are prone to flooding and provided sandbags or sand to go along with the sand for those properties, as well as our Chief Kimura has been participating in the Cook County Regional Emergency Action Committee, and they've been monitoring regionally the river flow and preparing equipment in the event that we do have a flood event. So I do want to thank Ed and his crew for all of the hard work, and in the 4 years that I've been here, I've never had all 3 channels in town at the same time, taping various locations and public works crews hard at work. As well as because of that, it just so happened that earlier today, we had a vehicle was struck by an Amtrak train coming through, and it just, as the TV crews were here, that also happened. So it's been a very, very busy day. We will post the presentation that was provided earlier this afternoon on the village website, so anyone interested in looking at the study will have access to that study via our website. And then the last thing I just wanted to do is provide the board with some updates on some of the things that the Economic Development Commission has been working on. We happen to have one of our commissioners in the audience, so if you do have any questions, I'm sure Christine will be happy to answer them. 2 things in particular that the commission has been busy trying to coordinate and pull together is a brokers meeting or tour where we will be inviting local brokers to Riverside and provide a tour of vacant spaces that they will then put in touch with clients so that we can try to attract different individuals to town to fill up some of our vacant storefronts. And then the other one is a discussion or forum, I guess you would call it, with Anthony Griffin, who is the executive director of the Berwyn Development Corporation, to have him come and speak to individuals in the community about the Development Corporation, how they did certain things in revitalizing certain low underperforming streets in Berwyn. So maybe to try and learn from them and maybe apply some of the things that work there here in Riverside. So we will provide information on dates for those events as they are set in stone, but I wanted to at least let you know of those things. And I think one was sometime in March and the other one was in March 10th. And then is the discussion forum, and then May 1 is the tour. So that is all I have.
Great. Thank you very much. Christine, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that? No, don't put the camera on me. And Mr. Bailey, there was no talking to him after all his TV appearances the other day. He's putting gel in his hair now. We've all had enough winter, that's for sure. Moving on to the approval of the consent agenda, are there any items that anyone needs to have removed for discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second for approval.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Hamilton, second by Mr. Foley. Please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. There are no reports of departments or commissions. Next up are ordinances and resolutions. The first is a resolution authorizing the village manager to waive competitive bidding and enter into an agreement with Safe Step to inspect all village sidewalks. So Mr. Scalera or Mr. Bailey, who is going to present this? Mr. Bailey.
This has been an ongoing discussion item, and one of the, I guess at one of the last meetings that this issue was discussed, there was a desire to have some estimates, I guess, of how much it would cost to have all of the village sidewalks inspected. We don't know how many miles or thousands of feet of village sidewalks we have. We know we have 35 miles of street. Most, not all, streets have sidewalk on both sides. So the maximum amount of sidewalk we could have is 70 miles. And that's the figure that I used when I contacted companies to make proposals, is based on 70 miles of sidewalk. I had got two private sector proposals, one from Safe Step, and you saw the other one from Sidewalk Savers. And the Safe Step proposed $61.50 per 1,000 feet, which works out to a maximum based on 70 miles of sidewalk. We know we don't have 70 miles of sidewalk, but that's a maximum. That amount could be at $22,370. I did some, frankly, guesswork on what it would take to have part-time employees inspect sidewalks. That's, again, based on a 70-mile figure, 74,000 squares of sidewalk. A certain amount of time per sidewalk square, either to acknowledge, walk over it, basically acknowledge there's nothing wrong with it, or in the case of a sidewalk with defects, examine it, measure it, that kind of stuff. And then those employees would be, I would propose they would use computer tablets that would enter that data into that tablet at that, out in the field. It would come back and be entered into our GIS system. So at any rate, we have recommended an award to Safe Step in the amount of $22,370. It's not to exceed amount for inspecting all village sidewalks. You saw a copy of their proposal. They would be inventorying them and giving us a report on sidewalk squares that are defective, need to be saw cut, others that need to be replaced, and the other component is sidewalk squares that have defects but don't need to be replaced based on our inspection criteria. So, in a, kind of reiterating what my agenda history said, that's what I've laid out for you here.
We've been over this before. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Bailey?
Right now, we budget $50,000 a year, give or take, to do the sidewalks.
$50,000 for the last several years.
And when you decide, you make a plan on what part of the village is supposed to be done, and go from there, whether it's the schools, the downtown, or whatever.
What I've done most recently is focused on schools in the downtown area, and those are like, kind of view those as hubs of a wheel, and my plan from that standpoint would have been to radiate out from those. Those are big pedestrian traffic generators. So anyway, that's what I've been doing.
Okay, so unless there's a major infusion of cash, we're still going to be doing it at a $50,000, maybe $75,000 or $100,000 a year pace. So I don't see the benefit to having to know what all of our sidewalks are unless we have a plan to at least replace a good portion of all of those sidewalks, because this somewhat goes out of date.
And I can address that, but first, just from a, let's get a motion and a second on the resolution. We have a motion to approve the resolution. by Ms. Hamilton. Second by Mr. Foley. You know, in response to that, one of the reasons that we've put this up for discussion now is because of the consideration of the potential scenarios for the bond referendum. We're looking at the potential of whether we can combine streets and sidewalks into one referendum question. And as part of that, we would like to get some data on what the actual cost would be to do a comprehensive approach to the sidewalks, and that's what this survey would provide.
And do we know that we could roll streets and sidewalks together?
So far, our bond council have been very positive about that, yes. Anything else? Please call the roll. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Pollak?
Well, I have corresponded with Peter and Ed this week about this subject. And first of all, I really appreciate the efforts they've put forward to bring this to us quickly after we talked about it late last year. I'm just not convinced that we need to spend this kind of money for sidewalk inspections. I have some experience with sidewalks, not as much as Mr. Bailey, but I do know enough that, I mean, to identify the condition of a sidewalk square, I believe is a very simple thing. Any educated person can do it with 45 minutes of training. You know, we're looking, is the crack over an inch? Is it less than an inch? Is the crack this way? You know, what's the separation? Is there spalling of the concrete? You know, some pretty simple, straightforward things. If you had an employee walking the village at 1 mile per hour, which is very slow, 70 miles, that's 70 hours at $10 to $20 an hour, that's $700 to $1,400, right, if my math is correct. To go out and say we're going to spend $22,000 to have guys who make $100 an hour do it, when I think the education level that's needed for it can be done by a college student or part-time employee. I'd rather spend that money on actually repairing sidewalks than doing the inspection. So I'm hesitant to award a contract for this.
Mr. Scalera, Mr. Bailey?
Sure. I agree with you. In a perfect world, that would be, but due to the time constraint that I think the village board is facing on deciding whether or not this will be one of the things that you take back for a bond referendum, we quite honestly at this point do not have the resources to allocate a full-time person to do this work because they are extremely tied up with other projects that we've fallen behind because of the snow events. We could bring in an intern. However, most intern programs wouldn't begin until later in the spring. So I think I would have a hard time bringing an intern in that would do this, and that would be a perfect job for an intern to do, is this sidewalk inspection. So I think it's really the reason why we're recommending the safe step is because of the constraint the time constraint that we're in. If I'm
right, they're specialists in sidewalk work, and as soon as the weather permits, you know, they can be on the job. It's, you know, they're the most efficient way to get it done, you know, time wise.
Okay, so to follow up, convince me why that's worth. What is the time constraint, and convince me that that's worth $20,000 to address that time constraint.
A mile an hour of it, actually, Doug, because if you, how many feet are in a mile?
5,280.
How many feet in a square? 4?
Don't ask me to do that.
20, it's 5.
5. So how many squares is that in a mile? Quickly.
Wow.
I just locked.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
It's over 100.
Okay.
I don't think you can
before
do-
you go on. Okay.
Right. So I'm just saying, an hour is 60 minutes. I don't think you can do 100 squares in.
You may be right.
So-
60 minutes. So I think there's something
For
more.
$23,000.
But you're also compiling the data too. So it's not just walking down the sidewalk. It's looking at each one, seeing it, compiling the data, and there is a time constraint to this. So yeah, I agree. I think 22,000 might be high, but I don't think we're comparing it to 2,000. I think we're comparing it to maybe 15 or 20.
Even so.
I'm not sure I can be convinced that you could get an intern to do as good a job, you know.
Well, that was the
either.
question I had for Mr. Bailey. What about this notion that this is something that doesn't require much skill or?
I agree, it doesn't. We have criteria that's laid out by our insurance company. It's standard sidewalk inspection criteria, industry-wide, I'll say. And I think anyone in this room could do the inspection.
You're saying that's a very low bar? Is that what you're
It describes, you have a crack in a sidewalk, and the width, the opening of the crack determines the condition of the sidewalk, for instance. Other things that you look for is cross slope, which is an ADA criteria, and sidewalks from an ADA perspective are not supposed to exceed a 2% cross slope, so there's measurement involved.
I think
It's practice rather than skill.
I think probably the advantage of going with the safe step is, unlike an intern who will just mark that there's a defect in the sidewalk, safe step will be able to tell us this sidewalk can be addressed by saw cutting it. This sidewalk has to be completely replaced. So you're kind of eliminating the back and forth that having an intern or a part-time person make that call.
And that was the question I was going to ask, Ed, is are there some things in this 22,000 that we can ask that are very specific to Riverside, i.e. we're talking about going away from exposed aggregate to a broom finish, for instance. Are we able to, from the study, say we have X number of exposed aggregate squares already in place, so we know where those are, because those would probably be the most recent replaced squares because they've gone to that version.
That's not a criteria that I asked them to consider. Safe Step in particular is very easy to work with, very customer service oriented. Basically, what we want them to provide, they will. I mean, there's always a cost to things, of course.
Sure.
But they will inspect these sidewalks and give us the inspection report in a form that can be downloaded into our GIS system. Based on our sidewalk criteria, there could, just for example, there could be a crack in a sidewalk that's not actionable. You want to be able to identify that, though, also, because that's one you want to be monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
There's larger cracks, more significant defects where there's pieces missing from the sidewalk. That's a sidewalk square that you would want to replace or plan to replace. And then there are the vertically displaced sidewalk squares where one above the other. And there's our criteria is between a 1/2 inch and 1.5 inches. Those can be saw cut. When they get above 1.5 inches, it's not practical, or they don't saw cut those. So there's all of, and we should be thinking about the sidewalk inspection, not a one-time event. This is supposed to be an ongoing, continual process. And one benefit of this comprehensive process, or comprehensive evaluation, provides a benchmark for us that we can continue on. And I'll say this, that in a trip and fall lawsuit, and I've been deposed not just 2 years ago on a trip and fall on Audubon Road, this is the type of stuff these attorneys want to find out about, is what's your policy, when did you last inspect these sidewalks. This is part of our defense. What criteria are you using? And that all either weighs against you or for you. But this sidewalk inspection program should not be a one-time event. It needs to be ongoing. A challenge for us is this criteria that we have from our insurance company that many other communities have adopted, says it will inspect 1/3 of our sidewalks every year. There's also a caveat that as long as resources permit that, but that's the goal is, so on a 3-year cycle, you're inspecting all of your sidewalks. That's how you're keeping track of defects and correcting them or addressing them as they occur for whatever reason. And that hasn't been done here in the past. There's no evidence that the village has ever regularly, comprehensively inspected its sidewalks. If they have, I haven't seen the records.
I think it speaks to why we did this, about the sewers. I mean, we want to know the condition of our sewer system. We studied it. The same holds true with our sidewalks.
We don't know.
You know, you saw the plans or the recommendations they made, and it totaled over $7 million. They're going to come back and give us a clearer picture of how bad our sidewalk problem is, and it's up to us to decide how to divvy that up then. I agree, Doug. So it's a big number, but in the scope of things and what we're trying to achieve by doing this, I think we have to start from scratch.
Well, I know from experience that it can be done for a lot less.
Okay.
Let me just, I'll state that and be done.
Okay.
And the other point is are we putting the cart before the horse here? Because we haven't decided whether streets and sidewalks are going to be the referendum question, if we're going to have a referendum question. So, I mean, until we make that decision, it almost seems like it's premature to start. I mean, I would assume that if we make that decision that streets and sidewalks are what we want to do and that those are compatible, then we can call Safe Step and say, can you come out and do this? We don't have to have it you don't have to have this first. I mean, when we're sitting with an $8 million sewer problem, that really goes to the heart of a lot of people. I mean, if you ask me what's the most important thing we have on our agenda, I would think we just heard it. So I just think we're making this decision faster than we need to make this decision.
Well, I disagree on that. I think we need to have the financial information on what all of the liabilities facing us are before we can decide what we want to do about the bridge.
What type of time frame is this for them to do this?
2 months.
2 months?
Again, and we talked about 70 miles of sidewalk. It's less than that. That's the maximum it could be, but we know that all streets don't have sidewalk on both sides.
But are they ready to start the project?
Yes. As soon as the snow goes.
As soon as I can see the sidewalks.
Well, the snow's off most of the sidewalks.
Well, that's true. They can start tomorrow.
Yeah.
Until next week, and
Yeah.
Anything else?
Mr. Bailey said something that I hadn't thought about. It made me think. He said that we really need to be doing this every year, 1/3 of the village every year. How does this program you're recommending tie into that?
Well, it's a start because we have no idea at this point of the condition of all of our sidewalks. And that's a goal, like an ideal goal of examining 1/3 of the village sidewalks every year. But one of the things that we recognized, I'll say the insurance company has recognized in their policy, and this is their model policy that they provide to 70 municipal members, this is IRMA, that many communities, this would be an example, I think, doesn't necessarily have the resources to replace all of the sidewalk defects, and we know there's monumental amounts out there, or necessarily the resources to inspect them on a 3-year basis, 3-year cycle. We have to do the best we can, and I think from a public safety perspective, there's some obligation to make a real effort to do that. From a liability exposure standpoint, that's a significant thing that you want to be able to say is that, we couldn't inspect them on a 3-year cycle, but doggone it, we were out there and doing, 20% per year or something like that.
It would seem to me that if we do this study comprehensively and enter that into our GIS, then we can use interns in the following years.
Sure.
To keep it up to date. That would seem to me to be the way to
Right,
work
and
it.
we'll have a list of sidewalks that need to be replaced, need to be saw cut, and then others that are defective that we need to keep an eye on too, that are, are cracked, and those cracks will probably grow, which then become actionable. it's a significant management challenge.
Okay, all right. No further discussion. If you'll please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
No.
Trustee Valerie.
No.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Motion carries. The next item with regard to the aerial LiDAR has been removed by staff. That will be considered again in the future. So the next thing up is a resolution authorizing execution of an intergovernmental agreement between the village and the Major Case Assistant Team. And Chief Weitzel.
President and trustees, the resolution's in front of you tonight because the Village of Stickney approached the MCAT, the Major Case Assistant Team Executive Board, which is made up of the chiefs of police of 11 municipalities, asking for inclusion. They've never been a member. And in order for them to be included in the MCAT organization, each municipality has to approve them. In my research of this original agreement, it was actually signed by the Village of Riverside in 1978. Riverside was one of the first 6 communities to join the Major Case Assistance Team. So the only change in the agreement that is in front of you tonight is the inclusion of Stickney, which during the MCAT Chiefs meeting, I voted to include Stickney, as did every other municipality chief that was there.
With that explanation, I'd ask for a motion and a second.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Foley, second by Mr. Ballerine. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. And since you have the floor, Mr. Weitzel, you can lead us through the next one about the squad cars.
Yes, in front of you, Mr. President and trustees, is the resolution asking for authorization for the village manager to waive competitive bidding for the purchase of the squad cars. The reason is the waiver is the RZA Ford has given us the bid, the state bid. They've matched the state bid through the Suburban Purchasing Corporation, which the Village of Riverside is already a member. It is for, the budgeted item, it was for 2 squad cars at $68,000 and 1 administrative vehicle at $27,000. That's the original 2014 CIP budget. If you'll remember, one thing is that at the direction of the finance director, we included the changeover in the squad cars, so that price includes everything. The state bid, which was which was adopted by RZA Ford, comes to $58,404 for the squad cars, which is and $29,651. But with the trade-in, they're giving us $5,000 for each patrol car for $10,000 and $3,500. That $3,500 is for currently the deputy chief's vehicle that has 92,000 miles on it. The trade-in total is $13,500, bringing the total for 2 complete squad cars with extended warranties built into the price and the changeover is $48,404 for the squads. That's $24,202 each, and $26,151 for the administrative car. And one of the difference in the Ford product this year is that they're standard all-wheel drive and they come pre-wired. So our company that puts in the lights and sirens will not have to do the work to pre-wire the squad cars. So I'm asking for approval and the waiving the competitive bid to accept the state bid as is accepted by RZA Ford.
Are these utility vehicles?
They are. They're the ones that are replacing the Crown Victoria.
Okay.
They're a little smaller than the current
Explorer?
one we have now, which is the Tahoe.
Okay.
Tahoe actually isn't making a 14 squad car. They weren't bidding. If you wanted a Tahoe, you had to go with the 13. They're retooling, and they're going to come out with a 2015 model for police vehicles. So it's the SUV Explorer, but it's a little smaller than the Explorers you're probably used to, the more boxier one. You probably see a lot of municipalities buying them because that's what the state bid is. The only other bid that was out there, we could have got the Dodge Chargers, but they were more. Their bid is more.
So I would ask for a motion to authorize the village manager to waive competitive bidding and execute a sales agreement with Rizza Ford for an amount not to exceed $74,555 for the purchase of 3 2014 Ford Police Utility Squad cars for the replacement of 2 patrol cars and 1 administrative car. Motion by Mr. Pollak, second by Ms. Collins. Any further discussion?
Is this, do they then need to be fitted after this price, or is that included?
It's in the price. What they need to be fitted with is the cages, prisoner cages. This Ford is smaller, but all the current light bars, radios fit. This price does include we're ordering them black and white, but this year I was able to get on what's called a screening, so we don't have to order the car black and have it painted white. So it comes with a pre-screen, and that sounds like pretty minor, but that will give us more in trade-in, because when we trade those cars in, all our designer has to do is pull the screen off. The company, when we trade them in, they would prefer that they not be black and white to sell to the public. So it includes all those pricings.
Probably without the cage and the lights on it too.
They'd like to keep the lights. The cage probably they could do without.
Okay. Hearing nothing further, please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. The time is 9 o'clock, and we've just received an update on our river status. I'd ask Mr. Scalera to please update us.
The river level has gone above 7, which means we're at flood stage. So we will be changing the flood watch from a watch to a warning. And Director Bailey has left us, and he's out checking the different places that we normally would check in regards to flooding. So if we do need to take any action, we will be taking that action.
Thank you very
Might
much.
be a long night.
We've had several of them this year so far. Next up is a resolution authorizing the village manager to enter into an agreement with Zoll Medical Corporation to purchase 1 new monitor defibrillator in an amount not to exceed $29,440. Mr. Kimura?
Thank you, Mr. President and village trustees. In front of you is a referendum for purchasing of 1 EKG monitor defibrillator. The current monitor defibrillator that is used on our ambulance was purchased in 2007. It's at its end of its life, and we also have the opportunity to have a trade-in value for this particular unit. The new unit that is offered has several life-saving features on it. That includes a 12-lead EKG screen that paramedics would be able to see all at once. The current EKG monitor does not allow that. It only allows 1 lead to be seen at a time. The new EKG monitor also has a CPR assistance and monitor, which is pretty much, it is specific to Zoll monitor only. And this allows the paramedics to see how good they are performing CPR in real time. This is a advanced technology for Zoll, and I feel that, and the paramedics feel that this is one of the best features of this particular EKG monitor. Additionally, it does offer more accurate blood pressure monitoring features and allows carbon monoxide monitoring in the event that a patient is subject to carbon monoxide. Again, we have secured a trade-in value of $5,800. That is set to expire March 1st. So at this time, I ask the approval of expenditure of $29,444,000. It is budgeted in the CIP budget for 2014.
So I'd ask for a motion and a second. Motion by Mr. Foley.
Second.
Second by Mr. Ballerine. And as noted by Chief Kimura, this amount is $10,000 under what was the budgeted amount in our 2014 CIP budget. So any questions for the chief? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak. Aye. Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Motion carries. Before we move on to the next one, I just want to make sure that there's a T that is properly crossed here with regard to our clerk. The resolution concerning the sidewalk contract, because I can't remember whether this was specifically stated, that included as part of that motion, there was a waiving of competitive bid to authorize the manager to enter into that contract. Is that the understanding of the trustees? Okay, thank you. We now move on to considerations. And before us is a letter of intent between the Village of Riverside and the Illinois Department of Transportation, and this is pertaining to the improvements related to the intersection of First Avenue and Forest Avenue and Ridgewood Road. Mr. Sclair, would you like to lead us through this?
Sure. The letter of intent before you is a result of a number of meetings that the Village of Riverside, along with representatives from Brookfield, North Riverside, District 208, and Brookfield Zoo, have been having with the Illinois Department of Transportation, which was facilitated by our state rep, Michael Zalewski, who was instrumental in bringing all of us together to address the safety concern that all parties had in regards to the intersection of First and Forest and Ridgewood. After a number of meetings, IDOT had indicated to us that they had on their capital plan the modernization of the traffic signals for this intersection. And so working with them, we were able to move the timing of that project up to 2016 is where it's tentatively scheduled for. But in order to get to that point, they needed to work through the various phases. And we are now at the end of phase 1, and we would be entering phase 2 with this letter of intent that we would sign off on. And basically, the project would entail the modernization of the traffic signals with new energy-efficient signals and pedestrian countdown and emergency vehicle notifications, and the addition of a right turn lane on southbound First Avenue at Forest Avenue, the construction of an 8-foot wide sidewalk path from Ridgewood north to the school's driveway, and replacement of sidewalk on the east side of First Avenue from Forest north to a new Pace bus pad that would be installed, along with a right turn lane on westbound Forest Avenue onto northbound First Avenue. The total estimated cost of the project is about $355,000, of which the village's share would be approximately $49,870. And that represents a 10% share for the traffic signal work and 15% share of engineering fee for the project. One thing the $49,000 does not include is any relocation of village utilities that are located in the project area would be at the cost of the village. IDOT has estimated that to be approximately $17,250, but staff feels that that number may be lower because if there is any relocation that needs to occur, it more than likely can take place in-house and greatly affecting that number. So what you have before you is this letter of intent, and the next step, if the board concurs and agrees to have the village president sign off on the letter, we would move into phase 2 with IDOT.
And if I can just add a couple things, I believe, looking at this chart, I believe that the $49,870 does include the utilities. Oh, okay. So that would include the utilities. Just with regard to a few of these items, so this probably does require a formal motion then, right? Yes. To approve. Let's go ahead and get a motion in a second, then we'll have our conversation. A motion to approve, please.
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Foley.
Second
by Ms. Hamilton. With regard to some of these items, the traffic signals, for example, that is required under the new state state law with regard to upgrading to the LED lights. So that is a cost that, although they're asking us to approve it on this letter of intent, that's something that's going to have to be done anyway, and we would have to pay our share of that cost in any event. The $355,000 that the manager alluded to, that is not the amount of the project itself. The overall project in terms of the actual road work is in excess of $900,000. None of the costs that you see before you have any connection to the actual road work portion of the project. This all has to do with safety enhancements in terms of the signals, the vehicle, emergency vehicle preemption is the white light that lets people know that there's emergency vehicles coming. One item that you see on this chart with regard to transition lighting is something that neither I nor the staff recommend pursuing. That would be if we wanted to move the existing light pole that is at that corner. It's an old incandescent bulb light pole that under this scenario would just be removed altogether and be replaced by the combination light poles. So that $239,000 is not at issue here. So really what we're talking about this evening is the $49,870. And as the manager indicated, it was really through the efforts of Representative Zaleski who enabled us to get Secretary Schneider to actually come here, which is unusual for a Secretary of Transportation, and we were able to fast track this. So in order to keep it on the fast track, we need to enter into these agreements with IDOT. So any other further discussion or questions? Mr. Pollard.
Thank you. I appreciate the efforts of the village president and village manager to bring this forward. There are some certainly valuable improvements that are contemplated here with the pedestrian signals and the right turn lane for westbound Forest Avenue in particular. I'm concerned about the widening of the street. The widening of the street will reduce pedestrian safety at that intersection. The wider street, the longer it takes to cross, the longer a pedestrian is in harm's way. I would like for us to consider tabling this for 2 weeks and going back to IDOT and saying, do we really need that right turn lane on southbound First Avenue? Would you consider eliminating that from the project so that the street doesn't get any wider? You know, the width of the street is one thing. You know, the right turn lane enables cars to move faster through the intersection. Maybe there's not an alternative. Maybe IDOT will say, listen, we got to do this. We're going to do this with or without you, in which case that's their prerogative. But I would at least would like to see us pursue that and table this for at least 2 weeks, ask staff to approach IDOT, see if there's a way that that can be eliminated, the roadway can remain at its current width, and then bring this back to us.
So would you like to make that motion?
Sure.
So there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Ballerine. I can respond to that, I think. The premise that that widening the street will reduce pedestrian safety is an item that was specifically addressed by the engineers, by IDOT itself, by our own chief of police, by District 208. And then one of our residents asked for an independent road safety audit to be done. And a road safety audit is an independent group of people who come in and review a given project with the question in mind of, are there any things that can be done to further enhance safety, or are there any things that are being done that might negatively impact safety? The road safety audit signed off unanimously on every single aspect of this plan. They specifically also noted that the so-called refuge median that had been suggested by some of our residents was not called for. And they also noted that the number of crossing guards, the one crossing guard we have there, is adequate for the safety of that intersection. So I understand and appreciate, you know, your belief that the widening of the street necessarily would reduce pedestrian safety. However, the data and the expert opinion that we have unanimously with regard to this project negates that claim.
Has that been submitted? Have we seen that? I haven't seen that. I haven't seen any studies or reports that indicate that. I mean, I've been told that, but I haven't received any.
It was discussed. It was discussed at all of the meetings and specifically addressed.
Can I ask this question from a cost standpoint?
But does this relate to the tabling motion?
Or it relates to the cost motion?
Yeah, we have to. So the first question is whether or not we want to table this for
I have a question to the tabling, and that is, the only way I would be interested in tabling it is to go back to IDOT and ask them if, I think somewhere down the road, we're going to think of a different way to reconfigure that intersection, bringing traffic from the northbound side of First Avenue, being able to allow them to make a right turn easily into town, should that road, that Forest Preserve cut-through road, be abandoned somewhere down the line by us, because that's really not even our road, right, Peter?
Well, that is our road.
Is that, it is our road, okay. So I'm wondering, if they're doing all this work on that side of the intersection, can they talk about putting in a right-hand turn lane northbound off of Forest Avenue? Would that affect the safety? I just want to make all the changes that we're going to do to this intersection in one foul swoop.
I mean, I can address that because another comparable idea, an analogous idea, was to widen the on the east side of First Avenue, which also is Forest Preserve District. And one of the things that Mr. Fortman, who's the director of highways overseeing all this, said that once you get into trying to gain
Into
easements
the county land.
from Forest Preserve District, you might as well put this on the shelf in perpetuity. So with regard to moving this project forward, that consideration, I think, would derail the entire thing.
I think we should go through with this. I think it's something that we've been promising ourselves and the people in this town to address the safety at First and Forest for years and years. And we now have an opportunity to do it, and I think we should pursue it.
Okay. So anything else on the motion to table? Hearing none, would you please call the roll on the motion to table?
Trustee Hamilton?
No.
Trustee Pollak?
Aye. Yes.
Trustee Valerie?
Aye.
Trustee Collins?
Aye.
Trustee Foley?
I do not want to table this. No.
Motion carries. We will table this discussion for 2 weeks, and we will reconvene and discuss it at a future time.
The motion included that to direct staff to approach IDOT about eliminating the right turn lane. That was part of the motion.
Is that understood by everyone? Okay, we'll come back and report on that.
Thank you.
There is no need.
Could I talk to that for a minute, or are we done? Can we not talk about it anymore?
Sure.
I just want to say that my reason for tabling it is not because I don't think that the right turn lane should be there, because I do personally think that it should be there, but I respect Trustee Pollak's need for more information on this and his comfort level with this. So if we could, in approaching IDOT, just get a very clear response as to whether, a very simple question of, does a right turn lane, is that seen as an increased risk to pedestrians or not? And that's what we're looking for. And then I would like to quickly move forward with this.
Is that the understanding of the trustees, that that's your intent? Yes? Because that's not what the motion was.
Yeah, the motion was to eliminate.
The motion was to go to them and ask them to eliminate it. You're saying that you want further information
My
about
understanding
whether-
was that the motion was to table it so that we could ask IDOT the
Is
question.
that your understanding?
Ask them the question, right.
Okay,
Ask
as long as we're all
them if
clear
they
on that.
would-
Okay.
The pros and cons of eliminating the.
Okay, so further information is what we're
On that
requesting. Okay,
specific question.
got it. Any new business? There is no need for an executive session this evening, so I'd ask for a motion, a second to adjourn. Motion to adjourn by Mr. Foley. Need a second to adjourn?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ballerine. All in favor? Call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton?
Nobody's paying attention.
Aye. Trustee Pollak?
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Meeting's
Aye.
adjourned.